The massive chamber fell silent as Captain Riker Jackson stepped onto the testing platform. Thousands of alien observers watched from their crystalline pods, their varied forms unified in their certainty that they were about to witness another death. The test had killed every being who had ever attempted it, all 10,427 of them. "This is highly irregular," rumbled First Observer Nexus, its plasma form rippling with barely contained agitation. "Humans weren't supposed to discover the testing ground for another century. They're not ready." High Commander Vrel, a being of pure thought and energy, moved closer to the observation window. And yet here they are, insisting on their right to attempt the test. Their arrogance will be their undoing, like all the others. Below them, Riker examined the featureless white room that would either become his tomb or the site of humanity's greatest triumph. He knew the statistics, or rather, the single statistic that mattered. In 15,000 years of the test's existence, the survival rate stood at exactly 0%. "Captain Jackson," the automated system's voice echoed through the chamber, "do you understand that this test was specifically designed to be lethal? That its purpose is to eliminate species deemed too dangerous for galactic civilization?" Riker smiled slightly, adjusting the simple gray jumpsuit they'd given him. "I understand that's what you intended it to be." A murmur ran through the watching aliens. No candidate had ever responded with anything but fear or resignation. But then, no human had ever stood in this chamber before. "The test will begin in 100 heartbeats," announced the system. "Once initiated, there is no possibility of intervention or rescue. Death is not a potential outcome, it is the only outcome." Riker's smile didn't waver. "That's what they said about the Mars disaster, about the Jupiter storm, about the void gap. Humanity's still here." The chamber's walls began to pulse with an ominous light. Most alien species saw this as their last chance to withdraw, to accept their place as a lesser civilization. Riker saw it as humanity's first real chance to prove itself. "You still don't understand what you're facing," First Observer Nexus transmitted directly into Riker's mind. "This test was designed by the combined intellect of the galaxy's eldest species. It adapts, it learns, it exploits every weakness. It cannot be survived." "Cannot," Riker replied, stretching his muscles in preparation. "Humanity's favorite word, right before we do exactly what everyone said we couldn't." The countdown reached its final moments. Throughout the observation pods, alien beings settled in to watch what they assumed would be yet another quick death. A few felt pity for this young species that had discovered them too soon, that hadn't learned its place in the cosmic hierarchy. "Test commencing," the system announced. "Final warning, this test was meant to kill. It has never failed in this purpose." Riker took his starting position, mind clear, body ready. Humanity had sent him not because he was their strongest or smartest or most skilled. They'd sent him because he embodied their species' most defining trait, the absolute refusal to accept impossible odds. "Let's find out what happens," he said calmly, "when an unstoppable force meets an allegedly unsurvivable test." The chamber began to transform, reality itself seeming to warp and tear around him. The test was beginning, its fatal purpose about to unfold. But for the first time in its long history, it faced something it had never encountered before, a species that thrived on beating impossible odds. As the chamber dissolved into a nightmare of shifting physics and deadly challenges, Riker felt an emotion that no previous candidate had ever experienced at this moment: excitement. The test was about to learn what humanity had known since they first looked up at the stars. Nothing was truly unsurvivable, not if you were human enough to rewrite the rules of survival itself. The chamber erupted into chaos. Reality fractured around Riker as the test began its deadly work. The white walls dissolved into a writhing mass of impossible geometries, each shifting pattern designed to break both mind and body. Where other species had frozen in terror, Riker moved. The first wave hit like a tsunami of broken physics. Gravity reversed, multiplied, twisted in on itself. Most beings would have been crushed instantly, their bodies pulverized by forces that shouldn't exist. But humans had trained for extreme gravitational conditions since their first ventures into space. Riker rolled with the changes, using each gravitational shift to propel himself toward stable zones. "Fascinating," High Commander Vrel observed from the safety of the observation pod. "It's treating the killing field like a navigation challenge." First Observer Nexus's plasma form pulsed with concern. "Increase the reality distortion. No species has ever survived past the first 30 seconds." The test responded, transforming the chamber into a maze of temporal shifts. Sections of space aged millions of years in seconds, while others reversed time altogether. Previous candidates had been torn apart at the molecular level, their bodies unable to cope with existing in multiple time streams simultaneously. Riker felt his cells screaming as time itself tried to rip him apart, but humans had theorized about temporal mechanics for centuries. Time isn't linear, he muttered through gritted teeth, remembering his training. It's just another dimension to move through. He began timing his movements with the temporal shifts, using the differences in time flow to his advantage. Where time accelerated, he let his momentum carry him through. Where it reversed, he used the temporal backflow to recover from injuries that hadn't technically happened yet. 1 minute mark, announced the automated system, genuine surprise in its artificial voice. No candidate has ever. Focus on the kill, interrupted First Observer Nexus. Deploy the consciousness splitter. The air itself seemed to crystallize, forming patterns designed to shatter any conscious mind that observed them. It was a weapon developed by the oldest species in the galaxy, meant to fragment consciousness into its component parts. No being had ever maintained cognitive coherence while exposed to it. But humans had something other species didn't, an evolved resistance to cognitive dissonance. Millennia of dreaming, of holding contradictory thoughts, of creating art that defied logic, all of it had prepared humanity for this moment. Riker's mind began to split, his consciousness fragmenting into multiple streams of awareness. Instead of fighting it, he let it happen. Each fragment of his consciousness handled a different aspect of survival, working in parallel rather than breaking apart. Impossible, whispered one of the observing aliens. It's using the consciousness splitter to enhance its processing capacity. 2 minutes in, and Riker was not only surviving, he was learning. Each deadly challenge revealed something about the test's nature, its underlying patterns. The test had been designed by beings who believed in absolute rules, in the immutability of physical laws. But humans had always seen laws as guidelines, meant to be bent or broken when survival demanded it. Deploy the phase shifter, ordered High Commander Vrel. No organic matter can maintain cohesion through a total phase shift. The chamber filled with a reality-bending field that should have dissolved Riker's molecular bonds. His body began to lose cohesion, atoms threatening to scatter across dimensional planes. Previous candidates had dispersed into constituent particles, their very essence scattered across realities. Riker focused on what humans had known since they first faced death, the sheer, stubborn will to exist. His consciousness, still split into parallel streams, worked to maintain a pattern of his existence. Where his body began to dissolve, his mind held the template of what he should be. 3 minutes, announced the system. Candidate maintains partial cohesion. The observing aliens were no longer hiding their agitation. This test had been their guarantee, their way of eliminating species that might one day challenge their dominion. It had worked flawlessly for 15,000 years, killing everything from energy beings to quantum intelligences. But they had never encountered human adaptability. Each lethal challenge was teaching Riker more about how the test worked, about the assumptions built into its killing methods. Where other species saw inviolable laws of physics, he saw variables to be manipulated. Full spectrum assault, First Observer Nexus commanded, its plasma form now a maelstrom of agitated energy. Every killing method simultaneously, nothing survives that. The chamber became a hell beyond description. Every form of death the ancient species had devised, every method of unmaking they had discovered in their long history, all of it focused on a single human being. Riker's split consciousness screamed across multiple dimensions. His partially phased body fought to maintain existence against forces designed to erase him from reality itself. By every measure, by every law of physics the test's creators held dear, he should have been dead many times over. But he had long since stopped playing by their rules, where the test threw absolute laws at him, he responded with human possibility. Where it demanded his death, he answered with adaptation. 4 minutes in, and Riker Jackson was teaching the galaxy's oldest species a lesson they had forgotten. There is no such thing as an unsurvivable situation, only a failure of imagination in finding a way to survive. Continue observation, High Commander Vrel ordered, its energy form dimming with what might have been fear. We must understand how it's doing this. The test raged on, its perfect killing record threatened for the first time in 15,000 years. And in the heart of that impossible storm, a human smiled, knowing that with every second he survived, he was changing the galaxy's understanding of what was possible. 5 minutes into what should have been an unsurvivable test, Captain Riker Jackson made a discovery that changed everything. Through his fractured consciousness, through the parallel streams of awareness the test had inadvertently given him, he began to see patterns in the chaos. The test wasn't just trying to kill him, it was trying to erase the very concept of his existence. The human's brainwave patterns are evolving, reported one of the junior observers, its crystalline form vibrating with concern. It's not just surviving the protocols, it's integrating them. First observer Nexus surged forward, its plasma form crackling with barely contained energy. Impossible. The test is designed to prevent adaptation. Each challenge rewrites itself to counter any learned response. But Riker had stopped trying to learn specific responses. Instead, he was learning the underlying language of the test itself, the fundamental rules that governed how it generated its killing fields. Where other species had tried to survive individual challenges, humanity's pattern recognition abilities let him see the bigger picture. Interesting approach to murder, Riker called out, his voice somehow carrying through the reality-warping chaos. But there's a flaw in your logic. The test responded with a new wave of deadly innovations. Space itself began to fold, creating geometries that should have torn any conscious being apart. Time accelerated and reversed simultaneously, while probability collapsed into singular deadly outcomes. But Riker was ready. His fragmented consciousness had mapped the test's patterns, understanding its fundamental nature. Each deadly challenge was based on the assumption that reality's laws were absolute, but humans had never fully accepted that assumption. The flaw, Riker continued, moving through impossible spaces with growing confidence, is that you designed this test using the physics you understand. But humanity's greatest discoveries came from questioning understood physics. High Commander Vrel's energy form dimmed noticeably. It's not just surviving, it's theorizing, analyzing, during a test designed to overwhelm all cognitive function. The chamber erupted with what the test's designers considered their ultimate weapon, the reality inverter. Space turned inside out, matter became energy, and energy became void. Previous candidates had simply ceased to exist, their very essence scattered across inverted dimensions. But Riker saw something they had missed. In the patterns of reality's inversion, in the way matter and energy traded places, there was a rhythm. A pattern that suggested reality wasn't as absolute as the test's creators believed. 7 minutes, announced the system, its artificial voice carrying an unmistakable note of astonishment. Candidate maintains coherence through reality inversion. Through his parallel streams of consciousness, Riker began to understand the true purpose of the test. It wasn't just about killing, it was about enforcing a particular view of reality. The ancient species had created it to eliminate any civilization that might challenge their understanding of the universe's fundamental laws. "You're not testing survival," Riker called out, his voice steady despite the cosmic forces trying to unmake him. "You're testing compliance, conformity to your understanding of reality." The observation chamber erupted in agitated movement. No candidate had ever perceived this truth. The test had killed them all before they could understand its deeper purpose. "Terminate the test," First Observer Nexus commanded. "The human is perceiving restricted patterns." Unable to terminate, the system responded. Candidate has achieved partial integration with test protocols. This was humanity's true advantage. Where other species tried to survive within the rules, humans instinctively looked for ways to change them. Riker wasn't just surviving the test, he was beginning to understand it well enough to influence it. The chamber's deadly challenges began to shift, their patterns becoming more erratic. The test, for the first time in its history, was facing something it couldn't simply kill. A being whose mind could fragment without breaking, whose understanding of reality was flexible enough to survive its inversion. 8 minutes, the system announced. Candidate shows signs of protocol assimilation. Through the parallel streams of his consciousness, Riker began to see more than just patterns. He saw intention, purpose, the underlying fear that had driven the ancient species to create this killing ground. They were afraid of exactly this, a species that could survive the unsurvivable, that could understand the unknowable. "Your test hasn't just failed to kill me," Riker announced, his voice carrying new authority as he moved through the deadly chaos with growing mastery. "It's taught me why you wanted to kill me in the first place." The observation chamber fell into stunned silence. The oldest, most powerful species in the galaxy watched as their perfect killing tool did something it had never done before. It began to adapt to the candidate instead of forcing the candidate to fail at adapting to it. 9 minutes, the system reported. Test protocols showing unprecedented modification patterns. First Observer Nexus's plasma form had contracted to half its normal size. How? How can it be understanding restricted paradigms while surviving maximum reality distortion? But Riker knew the answer. Humans had spent their entire history questioning reality, imagining alternatives, believing in possibilities that defied known laws. The test's creators had assumed that their understanding of physics was absolute. Humanity had never made that assumption. As the test entered its 10th minute, something unprecedented began to happen. The deadly challenges, designed to kill anything that encountered them, began to form new patterns. Patterns that reflected not just the test's original purpose, but the human ability to perceive, understand, and adapt to it. The ancient species had created the perfect killing tool, designed to eliminate any civilization that might threaten their dominion. But they had never considered that they might encounter a species that could do more than survive their test. A species that could understand it, integrate with it, and perhaps even master it. 10 minutes, the system announced, its artificial voice carrying what might have been awe. Candidate has achieved partial protocol control. In the heart of the chaos, Captain Riker Jackson smiled. The test meant to kill had become something else entirely, a bridge between human adaptability and the fundamental forces of reality itself. The galaxy was about to change, and humanity would be the ones changing it. The observation chamber had descended into chaos. 11 minutes into the test, and the impossible had happened. Not only was the human candidate alive, but the test itself was changing. Through his fragmented yet unified consciousness, Riker had begun to reshape the very forces meant to destroy him. Emergency shutdown, First Observer Nexus commanded, its plasma form now a storm of agitated energy. Purge all systems. Unable to comply, the system responded. Test protocols have been partially integrated with candidate consciousness. Shutdown would require termination of both. High Commander Vrel's energy form pulsed with what might have been fear. How is it possible? The test was designed by the combined wisdom of 1,000 ancient species. That's exactly why it failed, Riker's voice echoed through the chamber, calm and clear despite the cosmic forces still swirling around him. You built it on assumptions, certainties, things you believed couldn't be questioned. The chamber's reality-warping energies began to flow in new patterns. Where before they had been purely destructive, now they moved with purpose, forming structures that shouldn't have been possible. Riker wasn't just surviving the test anymore, he was teaching it new possibilities. 12 minutes, the system announced. Candidate has achieved 50% protocol integration. Through his parallel streams of consciousness, Riker could now see the test's full structure. It was a masterpiece of engineering designed to enforce the galaxy's fundamental laws. But those laws, he now understood, were more flexible than their ancient creators had ever imagined. You didn't build this to test species, Riker said, his voice carrying new authority. You built it to eliminate any civilization that might discover what I just did, that reality itself is more mutable than you thought. The observation chamber erupted in alarmed communication. Quantum signals, psychic emanations, and energy patterns all conveying the same message: fear. Fear of what this human understanding might mean for their carefully ordered galaxy. The test was necessary, First Observer Nexus declared, but its voice carried a defensive tone. Some knowledge is too dangerous, some possibilities must remain closed. Riker laughed, the sound echoing strangely through the altered space around him. That's the most non-human thing you could have said. Humanity's entire history is about opening closed possibilities. The test's energies continued to shift, forming patterns that its creators had believed impossible. Riker's understanding of its protocols had grown beyond mere survival. He was proving, with every passing moment, why the ancient species had been so afraid of encountering a civilization like humanity. 13 minutes, the system reported. Warning, test protocols showing unprecedented evolution, original parameters no longer valid. Through his expanded consciousness, Riker began to reshape the chamber's reality-warping fields. Where they had been tools of destruction, he transformed them into demonstrations. Each deadly force became an example of what was possible when you stopped believing in impossible things. Look, he commanded, his voice reaching every observer. Watch what happens when you stop trying to enforce reality and start exploring it instead. The chamber filled with impossible geometries, but now they were stable, harmonious. Time flowed in multiple directions simultaneously, but instead of tearing matter apart, it created new forms of existence. The consciousness splitter, designed to shatter minds, became a lens through which multiple perspectives could exist together. 14 minutes, the system announced. Candidate has achieved 75% protocol integration. Test parameters have been fundamentally altered. First Observer Nexus's plasma form had shrunk to a fraction of its original size. Stop this, you don't understand the dangers of such unrestricted possibility. No, Riker replied calmly. You don't understand the danger of restricted possibility, of believing that your understanding of reality is complete and must be enforced. The chamber had become something entirely new. The test, designed over 15,000 years to be the perfect killing tool, had been transformed into a demonstration of human adaptability. Every deadly challenge was now a window into new possibilities, every killing force repurposed to expand understanding rather than enforce it. 15 minutes, the system reported. Test protocols have been permanently altered. Original function can no longer be restored. The ancient species watched in growing comprehension as their perfect weapon became something else entirely. Riker hadn't just survived their test, he had changed its fundamental nature. Where they had built a wall to keep the galaxy within known laws, he had transformed it into a door to new understanding. Your test failed, Riker announced, but his voice carried no mockery, only certainty. Not because it was flawed, but because it was perfect at enforcing limitations. And humanity's greatest strength is our refusal to accept limitations. The observation chamber had fallen silent. The oldest, most powerful species in the galaxy were facing something they had never encountered before, a fundamental challenge to their understanding of reality itself. Their test, meant to kill anything that might threaten their dominion, had instead revealed why that dominion needed to end. 16 minutes, the system announced. Final status, test protocols have been permanently integrated with human cognitive patterns. The test as originally designed has ceased to exist. In the transformed chamber, Captain Riker Jackson stood unharmed, surrounded by the very forces that should have killed him. The test meant to kill had become something entirely new, a bridge between what was known and what was possible. And humanity had proven itself ready not just to cross that bridge, but to build new ones. In the transformed testing chamber, reality itself had been rewritten. The deadly forces that had killed thousands of beings over 15,000 years now flowed in harmonious patterns, transformed by human understanding into something entirely new. Captain Riker Jackson stood at the center of it all, his consciousness still expanded through multiple dimensions, his very existence proving that the impossible was merely the undiscovered. Final analysis, the system announced, its artificial voice carrying new depths of understanding. The test has been fundamentally transformed. Original purpose, species elimination. New purpose, possibility expansion. The observation chamber had fallen into a silence deeper than vacuum. The ancient species, who had ruled the galaxy through their control of fundamental forces, watched as their perfect weapon became something they had never imagined, a tool for evolution itself. "You should have killed me in the first minute," Riker said, his voice echoing through multiple layers of reality. "Before I understood what this test really was, before I saw the fear behind its creation." First Observer Nexus's plasma form flickered weakly. "You don't understand. We built the test to protect the galaxy from chaos, from species that would disturb the natural order." "No," Riker replied, his expanded consciousness letting him see the truth in ways his normal mind never could. "You built it to protect yourselves from change, from the possibility that your understanding of reality might not be complete." The chamber's transformed energies formed patterns that showed the history of the test creation. 15,000 years ago, the ancient species had seen something that terrified them, the possibility that younger civilizations might discover ways of existing that defied their established laws. The test had been their solution, a perfect killing tool designed to eliminate any species that showed such potential. 17 minutes, the system reported. Test transformation complete, new protocols stabilized. High Commander Vrel's energy form pulsed with resignation. "Do you understand what you've done, human? You haven't just survived our test, you've broken the foundation of galactic order itself." Riker smiled, understanding flowing through his multiple streams of consciousness. "No, I've shown you that your foundation was built on fear, fear of what might be possible if you stopped enforcing your limitations on the galaxy." The transformed chamber now displayed impossible things, stable paradoxes, harmonious contradictions, new ways of existing that the ancient species had believed would destroy reality itself. But reality wasn't breaking. It was expanding, growing, becoming more than they had allowed it to be. "Look," Riker commanded, gesturing at the swirling patterns around him. "Every species you killed with this test might have discovered something new, might have shown you a different way of seeing reality. Instead, you killed them for the crime of thinking differently." Through his expanded awareness, Riker could feel the impact of his words rippling through the assembled ancient beings. Their certainty, maintained for 15,000 years, was crumbling in the face of demonstrated possibility. 18 minutes, announced the system. Warning, detection of fundamental paradigm shift in observer consciousness patterns. The chamber's energies formed new configurations, showing possibilities that even Riker's expanded mind could barely comprehend. The test, designed to enforce limitations, had become a window into infinite potential. Each deadly force, transformed by human adaptability, now revealed new ways of understanding existence itself. You feared chaos, Riker said, his voice gentle despite its authority. But look at this. Look at how many new possibilities exist between order and chaos, between what you believed was possible and what actually is. First observer Nexus's plasma form began to expand slowly, showing the first signs of adaptation. How can this be stable? How can reality support such flexibility? Because reality was never as rigid as you believed, Riker explained. Humanity learned that early. Every time we discovered something impossible, we didn't try to deny it, we expanded our understanding to include it. The chamber had become a demonstration of this truth. The very forces designed to destroy anything that challenged established laws now showed how those laws could be expanded, evolved, grown into something greater. 19 minutes, the system reported, detecting widespread alteration in fundamental understanding patterns among observer species. The ancient beings watched as their perfect weapon, their guardian of established order, became a teacher of new possibilities. Each deadly protocol, transformed by human consciousness, showed them something they had forgotten in their long dominion: the joy of discovery, the thrill of new understanding. The test meant to kill, Riker said, standing in the heart of transformed reality. But not because it had to, because you designed it with a limited purpose. Human survival didn't break your test, it fulfilled its true potential. 20 minutes after entering what should have been his death chamber, Captain Riker Jackson had done more than survive. He had shown the galaxy's oldest species that their greatest fear, the chaos they thought would come from unlimited possibility, was actually the source of greatest growth. Final status, the system announced, its voice carrying something like wonder. The test has been permanently transformed. New function, exploration of possibility, all lethal protocols converted to discovery protocols.